They were gone by morning. The Bellamy family, all 5 of them, vanished from their home in Wolcroft without a single sound, a struggle, or a goodbye. Clothes still hanging in the wardrobe. Teacups still warm on the table. The clock in the foyer frozen at 3:17 a.m., shattered from within, as if something had struck it from the other side of time. But this was no ordinary disappearance, because when investigators opened the cellar door, they found something waiting. It was not human, and it had been waiting a long, long time. Welcome to Dead Scroll, where we expose the darkness buried beneath history's polished surface. If you're one of the few men who still seek truth in a world built on silence, subscribe now and hit the bell. This isn't entertainment. This is transformation. Because what you're about to hear doesn't just explain what happened to the Bellamys. It explains why men vanish. Wolcroft, 1952. A town so unremarkable, it was considered safe. A place where time seemed stuck in the lull between post-war recovery and modern ambition. Men returned from war and tried to forget what they'd seen. Women kept house with silent dignity. Children played in the fields behind St. Adalbert's, under the shadow of a church older than the country itself. And yet, beneath that sleepy rhythm, something ancient was stirring. The Bellamy family had only lived in Wolcroft for 8 months. Records show they moved into the Harrington house, a crumbling estate with Gothic arches and ivy-covered brick, untouched since the fire of 1911. Locals said the place was cursed, but the Bellamys were outsiders from the city. Educated, practical, the kind of people who didn't believe in curses. Until the night the voices began. Neighbors claimed they heard music, soft, distant, melodic, playing from inside the house at odd hours. Bells that didn't match any known hymn. Chords that made the hairs on your arms rise, even behind closed windows. The priest at St. Adalbert's refused to set foot near the estate. Then came the children's drawings. Then came the shadows in the trees. And then, nothing. Silence. Absence. A hole in reality where a family used to be. And in that hole, something waits still. Officially, the Bellamy case was opened at 7:43 a.m. on October 18, 1952. A neighbor, Mrs. Lillian Groves, reported that the Bellamy children hadn't shown up for school. She said the house felt wrong. Not quiet. Wolcroft had known quiet. This was different, as if the building itself were holding its breath. Sheriff Alan Greaves responded first. He'd served Wolcroft for 19 years, a man grounded in routines, paperwork, and pragmatism. But when he stepped into that house, he never was the same again. The front door was unlocked. No signs of forced entry. No blood. No broken glass. The dining table had been set for breakfast. 5 places, toast on the griddle, a kettle still warm. Upstairs, beds were unmade. Children's clothes laid out for the day. But no bodies. No Bellamys. No signs of departure. Sheriff Greaves noted something strange. A smell in the air, not rot, not chemical. Old, like burnt parchment or extinguished candles. He entered the basement. He was down there only 4 minutes before he came back up, white as ash, eyes glazed, and hands trembling. He said only one thing. Seal this place. Immediately. That basement door was bolted shut by county order. No photographs. No sketches. The report? Vanished. The sheriff's notes? Confiscated by the state. And what Greaves saw down there? He never told a soul. 3 weeks later, he resigned. Wolcroft never pressed for answers. Because the truth was, this wasn't the first time. The Bellamy incident was just the latest in a series of disappearances, every 27 years like clockwork. Going back to 1805. Always from the same house. Always with the same signs, clock stopping at 3:17, strange music, and the scent of old flame. There were whispers, of course. Locals who spoke in hushed tones about the doorway under Harrington House. A few called it a crypt, others a sanctum, but the oldest families they called it by its real name, the Chamber of Stillness. And they warned, it doesn't take who you are, it takes who you might have become. It feeds on potential and erases it from history. The Bellamys weren't murdered. They weren't kidnapped. They were consumed. What is the Chamber of Stillness? To understand what took the Bellamy family, we must go back to long before they ever arrived in Wolcroft. Before the town had a name. before the soil was divided and mapped, when the land was still wild, and something older ruled beneath it. In 1743, Jesuit missionaries arrived in the region to establish what would become St. Adalbert's Parish. But early letters hidden by the Vatican and only rediscovered in 1931, tell a different story. One of fear, abandonment, and a structure buried in the earth that none of the priests could explain. They wrote of underground tunnels that predated any known colonial construction, of markings on the walls that resembled no known language, of a silence, the unnatural kind that bends your perception, like sound itself has been swallowed. One letter ended simply with this line: "There are bells that ring from below, but no hands pull the rope." You see, the chamber was never built. It was discovered. The Jesuits sealed it and built the church atop it, believing holy ground might suppress whatever waited beneath. But the structure fought back, quietly, methodically. Every 27 years, a family drawn to the house above would vanish. No survivors, no evidence. And every time, 3:17 a.m., the hour between body and soul, between reason and madness. The Bellamy family didn't just stumble into a haunted house. They were chosen, lured by something buried, something that could only feed through them. And here's where it gets worse. In 1952, after the family disappeared, a linguist named Howard Bram came to study the house. He had no affiliation with the town, no connection to the Bellamys. But he brought with him 9 audio reels, recordings taken from beneath Harrington House over 3 nights. Only one reel survived. It's been played only twice. Both times, listeners reported hallucinations, bleeding noses, and the sensation of being watched by something just beyond vision. The reel ends with the same sound the Bellamy neighbor heard before the disappearance. Children laughing, then a bell tolling, then silence. Whatever is under Wolcroft, it doesn't want attention. It wants obedience. And it's been shaping history quietly from underneath your feet. His name was Elias Crane. 6 years old in 1925, the last time the chamber opened before the Bellamys arrived. His family, the Cranes, were devout, private people who moved into the Harrington house after it had been abandoned for over a decade. Locals warned them, of course, spoke of strange dreams, music from the basement, and children who disappeared into the trees. But the Cranes were from St. Louis. Practical, dismissive of superstition. 2 weeks after they moved in, all 4 family members vanished. Except Elias. He was found barefoot, shivering, and covered in what investigators described as a fine ash, not soot, but more like bone dust. He was discovered 2 miles from the house, standing in the center of a shallow creek, staring into the distance, unblinking. He wouldn't speak for 3 years. When he finally did, the first words out of his mouth were, "The house breathes." Elias was institutionalized at Black Hollow Asylum, a place known for its brutal silence and colder methods. Doctors labeled his trauma-induced memories as hallucinations. But what Elias described matched events that had not yet occurred. He claimed the chamber wasn't just a room. It was alive, and that it whispered in a voice older than language, promising safety, unity, eternity. But the price was identity. He said he watched his parents walk into the basement, hand in hand, with smiles on their faces, as if they were meeting someone they loved. Then they vanished. No door, no trap. They simply weren't there anymore. Then came the part that chilled every attending nurse. Elias said he heard a voice behind him, a woman's voice, soft, calm, motherly. She told him to step forward, that he'd always been meant to join them, that he was the last missing piece. He refused. He ran. He didn't remember how he got out. Just that the farther he ran from the house, the louder the ringing became, like a church bell behind his ribs. Elias never returned to Wolcroft. He died in 1974, muttering the same phrase in his sleep every night for weeks before his death. The floor beneath the floor is opening again. 26 years later, the Bellamys moved in. And this time, the chamber wasn't looking to feed. It was ready to speak. In the spring of 1911, the Catholic Church sent Father Marcus Tierney to Wolcroft under discreet and urgent orders. The diocese had grown suspicious after hearing rumors that 4 parishioners had gone missing near the Harrington property in the span of 5 months. all after reporting strange dreams, intense ringing in the ears, and a sensation of being pulled downward during prayer. Father Tierney was known for his calm demeanor and his record of exorcisms in the Appalachian region, but nothing had prepared him for what waited in Wolcroft. He arrived on April 3, 1911. By April 5th, he was paralyzed from the waist down. He never left the town again. What happened in those 2 days remains partially redacted in church records, but a private journal kept by Father Tierney, hidden beneath a false drawer in his rectory, tells the parts no one was meant to read. On the evening of his first day, Tierney entered the house alone. He wrote that the atmosphere was thick, like breathing through fabric. There were no lights, no wind, just an unnatural stillness. He performed a minor rite of cleansing, reading psalms, casting holy water, and marking the thresholds. Then he descended into the basement. Here's what his journal says. The air changed. It was no longer silent, but full of something I could not hear, as if the sound itself moved behind the walls. I lit a candle and stepped forward. That was my last moment of clarity. Tierney described being overwhelmed by visions, corridors that moved, eyes blinking from within brick, and the unmistakable sensation of walking not into a space, but into a memory that wasn't his own. He saw a long table, children seated at it, silent, waiting, and, at the head, a figure whose face shifted every time he blinked. Priest, father, stranger, monster. Its mouth never moved, but Tierney said he understood what it was saying. You are not sent here to save. You are sent to remember. The next thing he knew, he was in the field outside, crawling, legs limp, blood in his ears, and the Harrington house was still, too still. The church covered the incident. Tierney remained paralyzed for the rest of his life. But before he died, he wrote one final line in his journal, smeared, nearly illegible. It waits for a family of 5. Always 5. It's not random. It's ritual. The number 5 is not a coincidence. It's a pattern, a ritual, a requirement. Every recorded disappearance linked to the Harrington house, dating back as far as the Jesuit letters of 1743, involved a family of 5. Never 4, never 6. Always 2 adults, 3 children. Always balanced, as if some ancient equation demands perfect symmetry. But it gets darker. In 1978, a covert psychological report titled Pattern Behavior Among Sacrificial Displacement Events was conducted by the now-defunct Lowell Institute of Parapsychology. The report, buried in university archives until unearthed in 2002, examined 23 families across North America that vanished under unusual metaphysical stress. 18 of those families had 5 members, and 13 of those disappearances occurred within structures built atop limestone caverns, formations known to amplify electromagnetic fields and, according to the report, acts of psychic convergence. The authors propose a disturbing theory, that certain locations are not haunted by spirits, but are themselves intelligent conduits, geometric entities that exist outside linear time. They don't kill. They don't hunt. They balance. And the number 5 in such rituals is not symbolic. It is functional. 2 adult minds for spiritual anchoring. 3 child minds for emotional resonance. Together, they form a psychic lattice, a perfect, malleable framework through which the entity beneath the house can manifest in this dimension. Temporarily, silently. The chamber, then, is not a place. It's a threshold. And the Bellamy family? They were not unlucky. They were ideal. Precisely who the house needed. Even stranger, in 1943, a child named Lillian Harper escaped from another incident tied to a structure near the Hollow Creek Ravine, 140 miles from Wolcroft. She was 9 years old and missing for 3 days. When found, she said something chilling. There was a man with no mouth who told me I wasn't the right piece. He was waiting for a family of 5. No one told her about the other disappearances. So why did she know? Here's the part that will haunt you. Every one of the vanished families, including the Bellamys, had one child who drew pictures of a door beneath their house months before disappearing. A door with no frame. Just a void. In late September 1952, just 3 weeks before the Bellamy family disappeared, the youngest daughter, Clara, age 7, began to draw obsessively. At first, the sketches were innocent. Stick figures, crooked houses, dogs with 3 ears. But then something changed. Her lines grew darker, more angular. Her crayons became limited to only 3 colors: black, red, and a deep slate gray. She stopped drawing people. She stopped smiling. She started drawing the door. Not a door in the house. A door beneath it. Every image was nearly identical. A wide, horizontal slab where stairs ended abruptly, with thick, jagged lines behind it. Not bricks, but something organic, something alive. And in the center of that door, always the same thing, a symbol. One she never explained. It was shaped like an eye, but not human. Slanted, ringed. Inside it, what appeared to be a key, but the teeth of the key were teeth. Sharp, almost serpentine. Clara drew this door over 50 times. On the walls, under the rug in her room, even on the inside of her closet, where her parents didn't find it until weeks after the disappearance. But she wasn't the only one. David Bellamy, the middle child, age 10, kept a journal. Teachers said he was brilliant, but withdrawn. Inside his notebook, between math problems and grammar exercises, he too sketched the same door. But in his versions, there were words. Scribbled. Scattered. Listened through the floor. Mother is the key. Father is the lock. We are what it needs to become. Most chilling of all was one full-page drawing found tucked into the back of David's journal. It showed all 5 family members standing in front of the door, expressionless, eyes closed. Behind them, a tall figure. Featureless. Limbs too long. Head tilted slightly to one side. And beneath the image, in shaky handwriting. He already opened it once. He just needs us to remember how. Investigators dismissed the drawings as the product of childhood imagination. But months later, a theology professor from Miskatonic University anonymously mailed in an analysis. The symbol Clara had drawn, the toothed eye, is nearly identical to one found carved on the inner walls of an unearthed Sumerian catacomb near Eridu. That carving was over 6,000 years old. The symbol Clara Bellamy drew, the slanted eye with serrated teeth, had been seen before, but not in any Christian record. Not in anything Western. It was first documented in 1903 by archaeologist Dr. Elise Marwood, who was leading a dig outside Eridu, in modern-day Iraq. She uncovered a burial chamber unlike anything in the region, sealed in limestone, with no clear entry point, as if it had been poured into the earth rather than built. Inside, carved into the wall above a small altar, was a symbol almost identical to Clara's. The same eye shape, the same jagged interior, and surrounding it, 5 concentric rings. Each ring contained 3 marks, 2 upright, 1 inverted. Dr. Marwood's translation from Sumerian glyphs reads, "The threshold is not a place. It is a hunger, and it calls only through 5. Through flesh, through silence, through remembrance." She called it the rite of the 5th door. The ancient texts speak of a ritual designed not to summon something, but to keep something remembering itself. A consciousness that exists beneath time, dormant unless given 5 minds as mirrors. And here's the link to Wolcroft. Wolcroft's entire southern region rests atop a vast web of limestone caverns. The same mineral-rich structures present beneath Eridu. These caverns, according to geological surveys, amplify electromagnetic anomalies. Devices fail, compasses spin, and people report hearing whispers that aren't there. Now combine that with what Clara's final drawing revealed. It wasn't just a door. It was a map. In that image, drawn on the back of a wallpaper scrap found in her room, were tiny etchings that, when overlaid with the foundation blueprints of the Bellamy home, aligned perfectly with crawl spaces and substructures never listed in the public records. At the center of that map, a blank circle. No stairs, no floor, just space. But here's the most disturbing part. When that drawing was cross-referenced with Marwood's map of the Eridu chamber, the alignment was perfect. Same structure, same rings, same dimensions. As if the Bellamy house was a modern reflection, a reactivated site for a ritual over 6 millennia old. This isn't about ghosts or demons. It's about recurrence, cycles, something outside time, trying to remember itself through the minds of children. October 7th, 1952, 2 days before the Bellamy family vanished. Deputy Sheriff Arnold Hensley was called to the property around 1:30 a.m. after neighbors reported loud thuds and what they described as the sound of metal dragging beneath the earth. What happened next was never entered into the official Wolcroft records, but a copy of Hensley's personal logbook was found in his attic after his death in 1981. Inside it was a small reel-to-reel tape, labeled only. Bellamy House, crawl space recording. Here's what was recovered. First, static. Thick, pulsing interference. Then the sound of breathing. Hensley had placed the microphone at the edge of the basement vent. And for 36 seconds, all you hear is his slow, anxious breath. Then, a voice. Low, gravelly, not human. It doesn't speak English. It glides through syllables, a tongue not meant for our ears. Linguists later compared the structure of the speech to Proto-Elamite dialects, predating even Sumerian, but no one could translate it fully. Still, one phrase repeated 3 times. Aluen Mareth. Aluen Mareth. It wasn't until 2004, when a Mesopotamian linguistics expert reviewed the recording, that a loose translation was offered. They have remembered me. The 5 are whole. Then comes a sound no one has explained. A deep grinding, like stone moving against bone. And just under that, a faint weeping from beneath the house. Not from person, from several. Synchronized. Hollow. Like echoes remembering they once were alive. After the recording ends, Hensley's log notes one final detail. As I left the Bellamy home, I looked back through the rearview mirror. The basement light flickered. Then it went dark. And in that moment, I swear, I saw 5 shadows standing still in the window. But the house was empty. 2 days later, the Bellamys were gone. No struggle. No sign of forced entry. Just inner plates left untouched and 5 empty beds. Authorities dismissed Hensley's tape as a hoax. But why? Then, was he forced into early retirement 3 months later? Why was the tape erased from all county records? And why, according to classified fire marshal reports, has every structure built atop the Bellamy lot since then burned within 5 years? Spring 1971. Nearly 2 decades after the Bellamy family vanished, a developer named Curtis Rayner purchased the land, intending to rebuild on the old foundation. He called it a fresh start for Wolcroft, a modern family home to replace the cursed shell of the past. Construction began in April, but by May, workers started to leave. The first complaint? Tools going missing. Then, power issues, even though the grid had no faults. Then came the deeper reports, whispering through the concrete. Cold spots that moved. A feeling of being watched. Then they hit something. Roughly 4 feet below the surface, directly beneath where the Bellamy children's bedroom once stood, the crew's drill jammed against what they assumed was a boulder. It wasn't. It was an object smooth, black, perfectly symmetrical, 10 inches in diameter. Carved into its surface were 5 concentric rings etched so precisely that not even a diamond blade could scratch them. In the center, the slanted eye with serrated teeth. Geologists at the time said the material didn't match any known mineral composite in the region. It was denser than basalt, but non-metallic. When exposed to UV light, it emitted a low-frequency hum. Subsonic. Felt in the chest, not heard by the ears. Rayner, sensing something beyond his understanding, halted construction. But it was too late. Within a week, 2 crew members had gone missing. One returned, barefoot, clothes torn, mumbling the same phrase over and over. The 5 are echoes. The 5 are echoes. When institutionalized, he drew dozens of versions of the same symbol Clara Bellamy had once scribbled on her wall. The object was taken by an unknown federal team just days later. No records, no names. All that remains are 2 Polaroids taken by a site foreman before the confiscation. Blurry, distorted by some kind of interference. One of the photos shows something behind the object. Not a person. Not quite. A silhouette, elongated, bent backward. Its mouth wide open, but where eyes should be, there are only deep, black voids. The image has been analyzed dozens of times. There are no traces of tampering. And here's the part they never tell you. Rayner never rebuilt. He left the town within a year and was found dead in Oregon 6 months later. He drowned in 3 inches of water, his fingernails worn to the bone from scratching at the sides of a bathtub. Etched into the porcelain, That same eye. Wolcroft, June 1953. 7 months after the Bellamys vanished. Few people know this, but a discreet letter was sent from the Diocese of Providence to the Vatican archives, requesting urgent theological review and intervention regarding a residence in Wolcroft, Connecticut. The sender? Father Desmond Callier, a Jesuit scholar trained in demonology and ancient Semitic religions. But the name he traveled under wasn't his own. Church records show he entered the U.S. under the alias Marco de Salvo, accompanied by 2 assistants with no listed seminary credentials. Their purpose, to examine reports of non-corporeal phenomena centered on the Bellamy home and what the church privately referred to as the false tomb beneath it. Because what the construction team found wasn't just an object. It was a seal. Callier's journal, later recovered through Vatican leaks, reveals what he claimed to have seen: a network of burial chambers hidden beneath the earth, not of colonial origin. He describes stone etchings in a dead tongue, skeletal remains with elongated skulls, and markings consistent with pre-Adamic worship, a religion that, according to him, predated Eden itself. One symbol repeated more than any other: the eye with 7 lashes. He notes a sensation of being scrutinized from within, and on the 3rd night, his assistants refused to go back down. One went blind. The other attempted suicide and was restrained. Father Callier stayed another 5 days, during which he recorded the appearance of mirrored shadows at 3:13 a.m., exact time unknown, because every clock in the Bellamy house stopped working when the shadows appeared. In his final entry, he wrote, "I believe this place marks a fracture in spiritual geometry. This is not haunting. This is a beacon." When he returned to Rome, he submitted a 93-page report. It was sealed by the office of the Holy See within 24 hours, never to be seen again. But here's what they couldn't erase. In 1974, the Vatican issued a secret classification for 3 locations in North America, referred to only as sites of origin. One of them was Wolcroft, and according to a redacted memo released under the Freedom of Information Act in 2001, a Catholic operative embedded in the U.S. Marshals claimed to have traced 5 bloodlines back to the Bellamy home, and every one of them ended in unexplained death or disappearance. Boston, 1976. Room 409 of St. Sebastian's psychiatric facility was sealed off from public access for nearly 19 years. Few even knew it existed, a wing reserved for permanent psychiatric security. The patient inside? A man registered under the initials AB. But old admission logs, finally leaked in 1993, suggest a darker possibility. The patient may have been Adam Bellamy, the youngest of the Bellamy children, presumed dead in 1952. But here's the twist. No official death certificate was ever filed for Adam. No body was ever found. His name simply vanished from the Wolcroft census. Until he resurfaced here, in Boston, under a different name, institutionalized at age 26, completely mute, covered in self-inflicted lacerations shaped like interlocking rings. He had no known relatives, no birth certificate. The only thing found with him? A cassette tape labeled only with a single word: return. The audio on that tape has been analyzed by cryptologists, linguists, even sound engineers from MIT. The first 22 seconds are static. Then a voice. Male. Low. Unnatural. But here's the thing. It doesn't sound like one voice. It sounds like 5 voices layered at once, speaking as one entity. The message? He was not meant to leave. He was marked. The watchers want balance. 5 must remain. 1 escape. Then silence. But under spectrogram analysis, hidden beneath the waveform, was an image embedded in the frequencies, a sigil composed of concentric circles surrounding a symbol we now recognize: the serrated eye. More disturbing still, when audio researchers attempted to play the tape in reverse, the voices became screams, not of one man, but of children. 5 of them, crying out the same name over and over. Clara, the same sister who was never found. The same girl who drew the eye over and over in the margins of her notebooks. The one everyone assumed was dead. But what if she wasn't? A nurse who worked at the facility later confessed that room 409's lights never turn off. Not once in 19 years. And Adam never slept. He just stared at the window, whispering to something outside no one could see. Reykjavik, Iceland, 1981. A private investigator named Loren Vale received a letter with no return address. It was postmarked from Saftur, a coastal town barely scraping the Arctic Circle. Inside was a single sheet of hand-pressed paper, textured, flecked with what appeared to be dried flower matter. At the center, drawn in tight graphite strokes, was an image. Not a portrait, not a landscape, but a ritual schematic. 5 figures, kneeling in a circle, heads bowed toward a central flame that emitted not light, but tendrils. Those tendrils twisted upwards into what looked like an inverted tower. At its base, the eye, once again. But this time it bled. Thick lines fell into the circle like rain. Along the top edge, written in a mix of Latin and Old Norse. The fire does not burn. It remembers. The 5th was never buried. On the back, a single sentence, barely legible in trembling handwriting. My name is Clara. I was taken beneath, but I do not sleep. Vale had no reason to believe this was real. Until 2 days later, a second letter arrived, this one containing a childhood photograph of the Bellamy family, long believed lost. It had never been made public. How she obtained it remains unknown. The woman calling herself Clara claimed she had survived the 1952 event by being held in place, not physically, but spiritually. She described an underground structure, not built by man, that lived in cycles, only becoming active when all 5 are present. But she said she broke the pattern. She fled when something faltered, when the 5th ritual was interrupted. She believes the others remained in that state, not dead, not alive, but suspended, held in a kind of ritual stasis where memory and pain loop forever. Her final message to Vale, which he recorded on reel-to-reel, ends like this. Wolcroft was never a home. It was a mouth, and they built the Bellamy house like a tooth above it. I was the root that cracked, and it knows. Vale disappeared 6 weeks later during a flight to Edinburgh. His belongings, including the drawing and tape, were found in a storage unit rented under an alias. Authorities deemed the case a delusion, but a single note was left on his apartment wall, scrawled in charcoal. 5 points. 1 breach. The mouth opens again. In 1947, the United States Geological Survey conducted a routine seismic analysis across the northeastern corridor. Officially, the mission was meant to measure subterranean mineral density and tectonic fault lines. But buried in the appendix of an internal, restricted document was a chilling anomaly. Wolcroft. Deep scan vibration readings showed an irregular tremor pattern beneath the town. Not tectonic, not mechanical, organic. Lead researcher Dr. Everett Kale wrote in a now-suppressed memo. It mimics respiration. 14 hours dormant. Then 6 minutes of movement. Compression. Expansion. As if something down there is breathing. The pattern was too deep for excavation. The source lay over 900 feet below ground. Not a cavern. Not magma. But something they described as a hollow anomaly with walls too smooth to be natural and too ancient to be man-made. They installed a monitoring device. What it picked up was more than just movement. Every 27th cycle, to the hour, audio disturbances were recorded. Whispering, laughter, what sounded like the rhythmic toll of a large iron bell, but with no source and no reverberation. The data was sealed. The lead team reassigned. And within 2 years, every member involved in the Wolcroft project either died or was institutionalized. But Dr. Kale left behind a journal, smuggled out through his niece, which now resides in a private archive in Maine. In it, he refers repeatedly to a term, geological confinement entity, or GCE, his theory that a non-human, possibly extra-dimensional intelligence had rooted itself into the land beneath Wolcroft centuries before the town ever formed, and that it chose families. Not randomly, ritually. According to Kale, the seismic tremors were not just symptoms of presence. They were signals, activations. One final entry, dated just months before the Bellamy event, reads, "Something is assembling beneath us. The Bellamy land is its focal point. The breathing grows louder when they sleep. We should not have disturbed it. It remembers hunger. Remember, this was 5 years before the Bellamys vanished, before Clara escaped, before Adam appeared in Boston with voices encoded in his blood. And still, no one from the town ever warned them. because Wolcroft didn't want them to leave. July 12, 1952, 10 days after the Bellamy family vanished. A team of men in dark gray suits arrived in Wolcroft, traveling in 3 unmarked black sedans. They did not speak to the press. They did not identify themselves to local authorities. They convened with the mayor, the sheriff, and 12 prominent townsfolk behind closed doors in the Wolcroft Masonic Hall. Witnesses reported seeing boxes, heavy ones, being unloaded and carried into the basement of the hall under armed supervision. According to one retired clerk who spoke anonymously in 1983, those boxes contained legal documents and sealed financial ledgers, the type used for NDA enforcement and compensation. Within 72 hours, nearly the entire adult population of Wolcroft, 412 individuals, signed an official non-disclosure agreement under the authority of a federal entity known only as Division H. This is not conspiracy theory. Declassified fragments of the document, leaked during a 1979 FOIA lawsuit, reveal that the town entered into an ongoing silence pact regarding Event 7B and its accompanying atmospheric and subgeological phenomena. In return, the town received federal grants disguised as land repair subsidies, installation of a high-grade, covert communications line, an annual fund paid into the Wolcroft Community Trust. Adjusted for inflation, this totals over $11.3 million per year. Not a single resident, not one, ever went public. But there's something even stranger. The only existing roster of those who signed the document was partially preserved in a fire-damaged ledger. Near the top of the list is Father Elias Cromwell, the priest who reportedly conducted a mass at the Bellamy house the night before they vanished. His homily was titled, "When the house breathes, the door must not open." The document also notes that Elias requested a spiritual reinforcement team be dispatched from the Vatican's Division of Occult Affairs, a department the church denies even exists. The request was denied. The priest disappeared 6 days later. No body was ever recovered. But in the church records, someone penciled next to his name. He tried to unbind the 5th seal. It was not ready. What did he mean by the 5th seal? Why was a religious structure built directly over the anomaly, disguised as a church? And why did Division H call the entire operation the Wolcroft Breach? In 1972, the Church of St. Marcellus in Wolcroft underwent what was publicly described as routine foundation reinforcement. But the truth behind this renovation was anything but routine. The entire lower level of the church, especially beneath the altar, had begun to sink as if something was pulling the stone downward. The ground beneath the pulpit cracked. The crucifix above the sanctuary tilted unnaturally toward the floor, always at the same 7-degree angle, regardless of repairs. Parishioners whispered that it was a reaction, not deterioration, that the church had somehow been built atop something ancient and still aware. It wasn't the first time the foundation had failed. Historical records from 1894 and 1911 show similar sinkings, but the original builders simply layered over the problem with more concrete and prayer. But in 72, construction workers broke through a layer no one expected. 7 feet beneath the altar, behind reinforced limestone, they uncovered a sealed stone door. No handle, no hinges, no inscriptions. Just one thing carved in the center in Latin. Clavis intra hostium. The key is inside the door. What followed has never appeared in public records. But a now-retired contractor named Willis Gammond left a private audio tape, anonymously submitted to the Wolcroft Library before he died. In it, he describes what was found when the door was finally breached using hydraulic tools. There was no chamber, no corridor, just a vertical shaft, perfectly round, descending deeper than any light could reach. We dropped a flare. It never hit bottom. The walls weren't stone. They were warm to the touch. One man said it felt like skin, and there was sound. Not echo, not wind. Sound, like something shifting, dragging, listening. By nightfall, Division H arrived. The workers were paid in cash and signed lifetime silence contracts. The stone door was resealed, and the church immediately closed for restructuring. It has never reopened. To this day, the surrounding block is fenced off, not for construction, but under permanent federal easement. The reason given? Structural hazard due to unsteady terrain. But the priest left behind something, a hand-drawn diagram found in a discarded hymnal. It depicts the shaft. At its base is the outline of a human figure with no face, arms raised as if welcoming something in. And beneath it, in red ink, Bellamy, return. Every year on the night of July 2nd, the exact date the Bellamy family disappeared in 1952, the motion sensors around their long-abandoned estate are tripped between 2:07 a.m. and 2:11 a.m. Without fail. No matter the weather, no matter the surveillance, no matter the personnel on site. The house, boarded up and marked condemned for safety, has no power. Yet for a 4-minute window each year, light is seen moving behind the second-story windows, pale and flickering like candlelight, or like something pretending to be candlelight. In 1996, a local security contractor named Harold Finsley, assigned by the town council under supervision from Division H, installed an infrared perimeter system around the house. The first year it was active, the system captured what appeared to be 6 figures moving toward the back entrance. They paused, then disappeared from the feed. But what's truly terrifying is that none of the figures matched the build or outline of any Bellamy family member. They were too tall, too thin. One appeared to be bending backward unnaturally at the waist. When the footage was reviewed, the final frame before the figures vanished showed something even more disturbing. A 7th figure standing inside the house, facing the window. It had no visible facial features, but the outline of a long coat and wide-brimmed hat was unmistakable. This image has appeared before. In 1952, the last known photo of Jonathan Bellamy, snapped at the general store one day before the family vanished, captured a man of that same description standing behind him, partially reflected in the store's window glass. He was never identified. No one remembered seeing him enter or leave. When investigators returned to the estate in 2002 for a final inspection, they discovered something chilling inside the cellar. Something no one had seen in 50 years. A fresh footprint in the dust. Size 11. Narrow. Left behind on bare stone, where no one had walked in decades. And on the far wall, etched in black soot. No one leaves. They just stop being seen. There is something wrong with the land beneath the Bellamy house. Something that remembers. Something that repeats. There is a growing theory among fringe researchers and disavowed academics that the Bellamy disappearance was not a singular event, but part of a recurring pattern of recursion. A loop. A mimicry event. A force that doesn't simply abduct, but replays. Several disappearances recorded across rural America between 1940 and 1980 bear eerie similarities to the Bellamy case. Sudden vanishings without signs of struggle, followed by years of silent activity around the abandoned homes. Motion, light, footsteps, whispers, always on the anniversary. But one detail connects them all, the sound of voices behind the walls. Not random sounds. The victims' own voices, repeating things they said in life, pleading, laughing, screaming, calling for help. In 1978, Dr. Gerald Haraway, a psychological researcher from Massachusetts General Hospital, studied 2 children who survived an incident similar to the Bellamy event. They were found 5 days after their parents vanished from a remote cabin in Vermont. The children had been hiding in a crawl space, dehydrated but unharmed. When asked why they didn't come out sooner, the older child replied, "Because Mama and Papa were calling us from the walls." But their faces weren't right. Their mouths were smiling, but they were screaming too. He drew pictures. All of them showed distorted versions of his family, with eyes missing and black threads pulling their jaws upward. Dr. Haraway was so disturbed by the case that he withdrew from academia within a year. Before disappearing himself in 1981, he submitted a final theory to the American Journal of Parapsychology. We are not being haunted. We are being imitated. Something watches us closely enough to become us, but it lacks the memory of pain, the shape of love, or the rhythm of speech. It performs the living until it makes a mistake. That is when it takes. That is when it replaces. And this is why the Bellamy house is still monitored. The footage from July 2nd, 2019 shows a childlike silhouette standing in the front parlor window at 2:09 a.m. The same year a new family moved just 1 block away. At 2:10 a.m., their daughter, 7 years old, walked outside in her nightgown and stood facing the Bellamy house. Her lips moved. She was speaking, but there was no sound. The next morning, she told her parents, "He wanted me to come home. He said he was my brother. She has no siblings." In every version of the Bellamy file, whether obtained through leaked archives, declassified materials, or off-record testimonies, one name is consistently blacked out. Not just once, dozens of times, always in the same place. The supervising agent, the investigator in charge, the final authority who signed off on the classification and permanent sealing of the Bellamy case. He is referred to only as the director. No rank, no first name, no trace of origin. But in 1972, an internal memo from Division H was accidentally included in a military archival shipment to a private university in Colorado. It was marked for shredding, but it wasn't. It was saved by a young assistant who later became a professor of suppressed state secrets. His notes mention a chilling line found in that memo, dated March 5, 1953. Subject case no longer requires containment. Director has declared. Event is resolved through assimilation. No further inquiries. The term assimilation appears nowhere else in federal investigative language from that era. When the professor, Dr. Wayne Kellister, attempted to publish his findings in 1988, he vanished during a routine lecture at Stanford. His microphone cut mid-sentence. His notes were missing from his briefcase. The university chalked it up to personal instability. His students never believed it. One of those students was Thomas Eckhart, who later became a private investigator focused on institutional cover-ups. In 1997, Eckhart discovered something terrifying while tracing the roots of Division H's leadership. There had never been a public-facing director during the years 1952 to 1957. The listed office remained empty. No sign-ins, no payroll signature, no home address, just a sealed, armored file cabinet on the 7th floor of a building in Washington that has since been demolished. But before the building was torn down, Eckhart accessed its foundation records. In the concrete beneath the office, workers found a metal plate bolted into the floor. It bore an inscription carved in Latin. Nos vidit, non est homo. Translation: it sees us. It is not man. There were no cameras, no electrical input. Yet the room registered power fluctuations, only on the Bellamy anniversary each year. It was as if the very presence of the director, who never spoke, never showed his face, never signed with ink, still lingered. And here's the question. What kind of entity leads an agency dedicated to unexplained disappearances without ever appearing in photographs, transcripts, or memories? Between 1999 and 2008, 3 former Division H employees, each working under different branches, came forward anonymously, offering interviews to a restricted journal known as the Threshold Report. All 3 described themselves as whistleblowers, yet none provided real names. They were codenamed Gray Owl, Marlin, and Cypher. Each one claimed they had investigated or handled parts of the Bellamy case, and each one suffered from the same affliction. Recurring dreams, not just nightmares. Identical scenes repeating nightly. In those dreams, they would find themselves standing in front of the Bellamy house, staring up at the 2nd-story window. A child would appear behind the glass, pale, unmoving, yet staring with an adult's eyes. The child would press their hand to the window and mouth something silently. None of them could hear it, but all 3 claimed that if you didn't wake up immediately, the dream would continue. And if it did, the child would eventually appear behind you instead. Gray Owl was the first to break. In his interview, he said, "They told me the house was dormant, sealed, watched, but that thing, I don't think it's in the house. I think the house is in it. Like an organ, a living organ for something else. And we're the ones who keep feeding it." Marlin, who worked as an archivist in Division H's basement records vault, had a nervous breakdown 3 days after reviewing a sealed audio file labeled Bellamy Echo. In his interview, he stated, "The child on the tape isn't a child. It starts with a girl singing. Then it loops. But the loop shifts, offbeat, deeper, like the voice is falling through a throat that's too wide. Then it starts saying your name." He refused to sleep for weeks. Later found dead in his apartment. every mirror turned toward the wall. Then there's Cypher, the last and most detailed witness. She claimed that a containment protocol labeled Wolcroft 9 was initiated in 1954 to isolate not just a location, but a pattern, a living recurrence, a kind of sentient repetition. Her final words in the interview are now infamous in conspiracy circles. It doesn't want to be discovered. It wants to be told. Again and again. That's how it moves through stories. Through us. And that's why they'll never let the Bellamy file be fully opened. Because once it is, it'll start all over again. It was summer 2003. A restoration crew was gutting the eastern prayer wing of St. Edivaine's Chapel in Wolcroft, long decommissioned and rotting at the foundation. Behind the plaster, wedged between the wooden beams and stonework, they found something strange. A bundle of dried flowers, a child's ribbon, and a single folded letter, yellowed by age and sealed with wax. But this wasn't just any letter. Forensic analysis dated the parchment to April 1953. The author, as revealed in delicate cursive handwriting, was Agatha Montwood, the maternal aunt of Amelia Bellamy. The intended recipient was Reverend Charles, with a local minister and amateur scholar of the occult who had mysteriously died during confession in 1954, his tongue severed cleanly at the root. The letter reads like a warning, not just from a concerned relative, but from a woman gripped by true terror. Line after line unravels her desperation. Charles, I fear what we've done by pretending, by sealing the house, by keeping her quiet. The others refuse to speak it, but I will. Amelia is not ill. She is a vessel. Her drawings are not of dreams, but of memory. She names things that are not in the Bible. Creatures that have no face, but know your name. She describes waking to find Amelia standing motionless at the foot of her bed, covered in ash. Whispers behind the walls. Nights where the clocks all stopped at 3:17 a.m., exactly the time the Bellamy parents were last seen alive. But most unsettling of all is the paragraph that follows. The priest told me once that the devil knocks 3 times, but the old things knock only once. They don't ask permission. They just look for hosts. Agatha goes on to describe scratches inside the walls of the Bellamy estate. Not claw marks, not rodent tracks, but symbols, circular, spiraled, impossibly thin. She believes something had burrowed its way through the house. Not physically, but spiritually. Feeding off silence, off unresolved grief, off retold stories. And then, in the final line, smeared as if by a trembling hand, she wrote, "He's still inside the walls." That phrase is now engraved into the underside of the Bellamy cellar door. Not by Agatha, but by someone else, carved decades later. With no known access to the letter, in late 2011, an independent documentary crew known for exploring haunted architecture was granted rare, tightly monitored access to the Bellamy residence. Among them was sound technician Elias Crane, a specialist in low-frequency anomalies. His task was simple: run parabolic microphones across the interior walls, floors, and ceilings of the sealed Bellamy estate. He was told it was just a formality, that the house had been scanned a dozen times before. But on the third night, Crane's equipment picked up a pattern. It began at 3:17 a.m., just as Agatha's letter predicted. The frequency registered at 18.98 Hz, just under the human threshold for hearing. Known as the ghost frequency, it's often associated with nausea, dread, and hallucinations. But what Crane captured wasn't just a tone. It was a voice, faint, looping, speaking a language no one could identify. It repeated every 47 seconds, distorted and layered under the low hum like something buried alive beneath static. When the audio was filtered and enhanced, a single intelligible phrase emerged. "I remember every one of you." Crane became obsessed. He isolated the sound file and spent hours locked inside his van, replaying the loop until his ears bled from overexposure. He swore that each night, the voice added more words, as if responding to him, as if growing stronger through the act of being listened to. Then came the hallucinations. He claimed to see the Bellamy children in the mirrors of the house, even though no photos of them have ever been released to the public. He described Amelia as being older than time and wearing a veil made of sewn eyelids. He refused to enter the second-floor nursery again, stating, "The walls breathe in there. And when they exhale, they whisper my name. Within 48 hours of submitting his tapes, Crane's footage, equipment, and laptop were seized by the Department of Psychological Security. The official reason? Unstable audio signatures with potential mimetic properties. Crane has never worked again. He now lives under an assumed identity, but when tracked down in 2016 by journalist Amy Callow, he gave one final statement. If you listen long enough, it starts remembering through you. In 2013, a specialized cleanup crew was dispatched to the Bellamy residence under federal contract. Their objective: neutralize biohazardous material for potential conversion of the property into a state-monitored psychological research facility. The house had stood untouched for over 60 years, yet one location refused to remain clean. Beneath the main staircase, layered under decades of dust and time-worn floorboards, was a persistent stain, roughly the size of a child's ribcage, shaped like a malformed starburst, almost organic in structure. It had been reported in the original 1952 investigation, described as dried blood, but no lab had ever conclusively identified it. Now, with modern tech, the stain was lifted and analyzed. The results? Terrifying. It contained no red blood cells, no DNA, no organic trace markers. Instead, it exhibited electrochemical patterning identical to memory processing centers of the human brain. In short, what they found was not blood, but something scientists labeled cognitive exudate, residue left behind when memory is forcibly extracted from a living organism. It should not exist outside a living brain. Yet there it was, seared into the floor like a scream that had bled out and stuck to the world. Even more disturbing, the stain returned. Each time it was cleaned, whether scraped, burned, or chemically dissolved, it reappeared within 11 minutes, exactly in the same pattern. One of the team members, neurobiologist Dr. Simon Hale, attempted a digital model of the shape. When rendered in 3 dimensions, the pattern resembled an impossible structure, a memory loop, geometrically folded inward on itself like a spiral with no origin. Dr. Hale went missing 3 days later. All that remained on his workstation was a handwritten phrase. It is remembering us back. Worse still, the stain is warm to the touch. On one occasion, a crewman placed his hand on it without gloves. He immediately collapsed, mumbling a string of names, most of which were later confirmed to be children enrolled in a now-defunct private school in Wolcroft, shut down in 1951 due to inappropriate religious practices. None of those names ever appeared in Bellamy records. None except one. Amelia. She was the last one to see them alive. Her name was Rosetta Marlin, a quiet woman who served the Bellamy family as a live-in housemaid for 12 years. She rarely spoke to the neighbors. Never married. Attended church with mechanical devotion. And after the family vanished in 1952, she was questioned briefly, then disappeared from public life entirely. But in 1997, dying of throat cancer in a hospice in Maine, Rosetta gave a final confession to Father Howard Dowan. He recorded it in writing, then sealed the document, stating, "This is not meant for the public. It is meant for those who already know the truth." That sealed confession was leaked in 2019, and what it revealed changes everything. Rosetta claimed that during her final 3 months at the Bellamy estate, the walls began to whisper. At first, she thought it was stress, but then she noticed patterns, repeated phrases, always the same 3 words. Do not forget. She described how Amelia would stand at the top of the stairs at night, unmoving, staring down into the entryway. Sometimes for hours. Rosetta would beg her to go back to bed. Amelia never answered. She only smiled, and her eyes, Rosetta said, did not blink anymore. Then came the night of the disappearance. The Bellamys had a guest, a man named Dr. Halverson, whom Rosetta believed was a spiritualist or private medium. He had brought strange equipment with him. Copper rods, black mirrors, books that bled ink when touched. He was invited specifically to cleanse the nursery. Rosetta never saw what occurred in that room, but she heard it, screaming, not from terror, but as if something ancient had been evicted, something pulled from behind the veil. And when the screaming stopped, it was followed by a child's laughter, sharp, echoing, unnatural. Rosetta said the laughter didn't come from upstairs. It came from inside her own head. By dawn, the Bellamys were gone. No signs of a struggle. No broken doors. Every room untouched, except the nursery, where the walls had begun to peel inward, as if the room itself was recoiling from what had been summoned. Rosetta packed her things and left that morning, never speaking a word for decades. But her last sentence written in that confession has haunted investigators ever since. Amelia didn't disappear. She was set free, and we were left behind. The government never officially admitted Dr. Elias Halverson worked for them. But documents declassified in 2008 through the Freedom of Information Act prove he was employed under Project Echo Veil, a Cold War psychological research program that combined parapsychology, neurotheology, and trauma-induced perception manipulation. Halverson was no ordinary guest at the Bellamy estate. He was sent there on assignment. The FOIA files reveal that the Bellamy family had been under observation since 1948 due to generational anomalies. The children, especially Amelia, were documented displaying non-replicable cognitive phenomena, shared dreams among siblings, anticipatory speech, object displacement, and in one recorded case, the ability to stop a room's mechanical clocks by entering it. Halverson's private field log, recovered from a safe deposit box in a Nevada bank, is chilling. The child is not a vessel. She is a field, a tether point. Something is using her, not occupying her, but anchoring through her. They don't know. The family is unaware. But the house is feeding it. He goes on to describe the nursery in technical detail. Instruments placed in the room, EM field detectors, cognitive wave synchronizers, and theta band disruptors, began reacting before power was supplied. One device, meant to measure linguistic dissonance, recorded backward Latin phrases despite no one speaking. One phrase stood out. Amiculum mortis non dormit. The friend of death does not sleep. Halverson's notes turn manic after this. His handwriting becomes jagged, inconsistent. He begins referring to Amelia not by name, but as the mirror seed. He describes her as a cognitive decoy placed in our reality to reflect our thoughts back into a separate dimension, feeding something older, something incomplete. He claims his objective was not to save the Bellamys. It was to disconnect Amelia from the anchor. He succeeded, at a price. Halverson was committed to St. Mercia's Asylum in 1953 under an assumed name. He never spoke again, except for one moment, according to a nurse's testimony in 1972, when he stood up in the middle of the night and screamed. The Bellamys didn't vanish, they were swallowed. That same night, the lights in his ward blew out, and every clock on the floor froze at 3:03 a.m. The clocks always stopped at 3:03 a.m., not 3:02, not 3:04. From the first reported incident at the Bellamy estate to later phenomena across the world, this exact timestamp became a pattern. But no one knew why, until the discovery in 1991 of a hidden chamber beneath the Bellamy home. A group of paranormal researchers, led by Professor Lucian Hargrave, returned to the decaying manor under special academic clearance. Beneath the crumbling floorboards of the nursery, they uncovered a sealed trapdoor, nailed shut with 12 iron spikes, each etched with glyphs that didn't match any known language. Inside the chamber was a circular room. Bare stone walls, silent as death. And carved into the floor in blackened soot was a perfectly symmetrical ritual design, a sigil unknown to any religious order, but shockingly consistent with diagrams later found in forbidden Gnostic manuscript from the 1400s. At its center, a simple phrase carved in Latin. Transire per 303. Pass through a 303. The walls were engraved with lines, 7 of them, each marked with time stamps, locations, and names. Most were smudged. All were children. And at the bottom was etched the name. Amelia Bellamy. This wasn't just a family tragedy. It was a map, a mechanism, a ritual. Professor Hargrave would later confess, in a final unpublished interview, that he believed the Bellamys were participants in something ancient, either by force, bloodline, or belief. He described the house as an interstice, a location that exists between pulses of reality, and said 303 was a thin place, a moment where the fabric between worlds grew fragile. His theory? Amelia was the fulcrum, the sacrifice and the door. She wasn't taken. She opened something. And the Bellamys didn't vanish. They passed through, willingly or not. And now that door, once opened, waits for its next echo. Shortly after sharing these words, Hargrave disappeared without a trace during a lecture trip to Prague. His hotel room was undisturbed. His belongings still packed. The only thing found was his watch, left ticking on a nightstand, stopped exactly at 3:03 a.m. Amelia Bellamy vanished in 1952. Yet her name surfaces again and again throughout classified files, black site logs, and eyewitness reports spanning nearly 5 decades. Always the same age. Always silent. Always at the edges of mass disappearances, military lockdowns, or unsolvable anomalies. In 1974, at a restricted research facility in Marfa, Texas, a researcher recorded the presence of a small girl in white, standing at the edge of the desert just before a wave of unexplained EM pulses disabled all instruments for 13 minutes. The report was buried under a top-secret designation, Echo Protocol. Originally known as Operation Mira, Echo Protocol was initiated in 1961 following the second confirmed sighting of the Bellamy anomaly inside a NATO psychotronics lab in West Germany. She was described as the same height, the same blue ribbon in her hair, and the same unblinking expression as in the Bellamy estate photos from 1952. The observers, all experienced intelligence personnel, described a complete sensory collapse in the room upon her appearance. Voices became unintelligible. Memory scrambled. And when she vanished, one soldier went catatonic, repeating a single word. Reflected. A decade later, her name was linked to the mysterious failure of Crosley Station, a covert mind control project in Vermont. Surveillance footage recovered from the night of the incident showed a child in the hallway, her features blurred by static, staring into the camera for exactly 3 minutes and 3 seconds, before every clock and monitor went dark. When the footage was enhanced, one frame, only one, showed her lips moving. No sound, just one word silently mouthed. Remember. By 1999, internal NSA memos revealed a secret directive. If the Bellamy anomaly is detected, do not engage, do not observe, do not record. Let her pass. These orders were signed off by an unknown department labeled only as Division V. But who is she now? A ghost? A residual thought form? Or something far worse? A living conduit across fractured timelines, whose presence allows entire groups of people to be removed from existence. Those who studied her called her many names. But one phrase was common across nearly every report. She is the song before silence. The breath before vanishing. The last face you see when the world forgets you. The mirror-faced queen. Whispered in fragments across scorched pages, etched into stone tablets recovered from beneath the old Wolcroft Cathedral, and invoked in dream rituals by those who vanished after speaking her name. This is the entity scholars believe lies at the root of the Bellamy phenomenon, a myth older than America itself. Long before the Bellamy estate ever stood in Wolcroft, the land was feared by the Algonquin tribes who referred to it as Attican Wish, the place that reflects without light. Their legends tell of a silver-faced spirit, seen only at the edge of mirrors or pools just before death. She was neither god nor demon, but a sentinel of unbeing, the guardian of passage between memory and oblivion. When European settlers arrived in the late 1600s, they brought with them a splinter sect from Alsace, known only as La Société du Miroir. Their beliefs revolved around the queen who watches through us, and their texts described the same time phenomena. 303, silence, stillness, and a young girl as vessel. What's chilling is this. Early Bellamy family records list one of their maternal ancestors, Esme LaCroix, as being among those who founded the Wolcroft parish in 1691. The same woman burned in a ritual cleansing after the children of the mirror began speaking in tongues and drawing unknown symbols on their walls. But it goes deeper. Hidden beneath the Bellamy family crest is a glyph, a symbol composed of a split circle, a mirror, and a child's eye. This exact glyph appears in Vatican black indexes, classed as an entity conduit sigil, used to denote families suspected of inherited spiritual aperture. In short, they were believed to carry in their blood a door. The mirror-faced queen, then, may not be a myth. She may be the archetypal intelligence behind a pattern of disappearances and reality intrusions stretching back centuries. And the Bellamys? Her chosen stewards. Her bloodline. The echo that answers when silence is complete. So when Amelia Bellamy vanished in 1952, it may not have been the first time. It may have been a ritual reenactment, a cycle resetting. And this time, perhaps she opened more than just a door. Do not let her remember. These were the final written words of Father Dorian Vale, scrawled in blood across the last page of his journal, discovered beneath the altar floorboards of St. Elric's Chapel in Wolcroft, 1 week after his supposed suicide in 1954. But here's the truth no one was meant to read. Father Vale didn't hang himself. His body was found kneeling, eyes burnt out, face contorted in what the attending physician described as rapturous terror. In his chest cavity, investigators found something far worse, a folded page, soaked in bile, containing a ritual diagram with the name Amelia Bellamy at its center. Now here's where the fear begins to bleed through history. In 1952, just months after the Bellamy family's disappearance, Father Vale privately submitted a sealed document to the Archdiocese of Providence titled The Repeating Girl and the Window of Unbeing. In it, he detailed 5 separate instances, all in different countries, of children matching Amelia's description appearing before mass vanishings or collective memory loss events. One case occurred in Eisenstadt, Austria, 1948, where a girls' orphanage reported a new arrival named Amelia who could recite prayers in Aramaic despite being illiterate. Days later, every child in the building vanished. Only their clothing remained, folded on their beds. Local nuns were institutionalized, claiming they'd been erased from inside. Vale's hypothesis? That Amelia was not a person, but a vessel, an avatar of the mirror-faced queen sent across generations to remind the blood of its duty. In his last sermon, Never Delivered, he wrote, "She is not a ghost. She is memory rejecting form. She is the queen's breath. When she remembers who she is, the world forgets what it was." The Vatican refused to publish any part of Vale's report. Instead, they declared him possessed, issued a Class 3 burial, and confiscated all related materials, many of which were transferred to Archivum Tenebris, the deepest vault of suppressed religious history beneath the basilica. But now, fragments are emerging. One of Vale's secret letters was found behind a painting in the rectory. If she wakes, if she ever remembers the mirror, the town will not fall. It will unravel. And perhaps that's what Wolcroft is, a tapestry built on ancient blood, woven to conceal a queen who waits in reflection. They broke through the stone with silence. No celebration, no words, just dust, dread, and disbelief. Behind the fireplace in the Bellamy Estate's East Wing, a section of the manor no one had entered since 1923, was a sealed chamber. Its walls bore no decoration, only smoothed obsidian-like stone with a singular purpose. In the very center of the chamber stood a pedestal, and upon it an artifact, roughly the size of a human skull. It was triangular in structure, crafted from a metallic compound unknown to any metallurgist who examined it. It emitted no heat, no radiation, no magnetism. But what it did emit was sound. Not in hertz, but in memory. Those who touched it spoke in forgotten languages, described places they had never seen, and screamed about mirrors without walls. Etched into its face was a sequence of characters not found in any known script, but cross-referencing Vatican-coded occult glyphs, Sumerian proto-script, and pre-Adamic symbology. Scholars reconstructed one chilling phrase. She is still dreaming. And that's the horror. Not that the Bellamy family vanished, but that they were absorbed. This artifact is believed to be what Father Vale referred to as a mnemonic keystone, a memory anchor used by beings who transcend linear time. Beings like the mirror-faced queen. Anchors like this are placed to hold consciousness in place, to suppress it, until a vessel is ready to wake it. That vessel? Amelia Bellamy. The room's geometry was also unnatural, what mathematicians call a non-Euclidean fold. The air within didn't flow properly, and anyone who stepped inside the chamber for more than 11 minutes reported losing entire sections of memory, seeing themselves as children again, or worse, not seeing themselves at all in mirrors afterwards. This artifact, now labeled Keystone 1952, was quietly transported out of Wolcroft by unnamed Vatican agents in 1971. Its current location is unknown. But for a brief time, in the heart of a rotting mansion in a forgotten town, a window opened, and something looked back. Dead Scroll viewers, we are now approaching the deepest and most forbidden part of this mystery. Here is what was hidden beneath layers of denial, centuries of selective memory, and a Vatican silence paid in blood. The Bellamy timeline, a precise, almost surgical sequence of events repeating every 33 years, tied directly to the Bellamy bloodline. Each occurrence ends in mass disappearances, collective amnesia, or communal madness, always centered around a girl aged 11. It begins in 1786 in Wales. A girl named Anwen Bellamy reportedly walked into a cathedral during Mass and whispered to each person individually. Within 24 hours, the village's population was gone. Only the livestock remained. Then 1819, Belgium. An orphan named Annabel Bellamy appears at a monastery and begins speaking in a dialect no one recognizes. Days later, the monks burn the abbey and hang themselves from the belfry. 1852, Rhode Island. 1885, Northern France. 1918, Brazil. 1951, Wolcroft, USA. The names change. The continents shift. But the age, the description, and the final consequence remain identical. And in each of these events, one thing reappears. A triangular sigil, sometimes carved in stone, sometimes drawn in ash, sometimes tattooed behind the ear of a child who shouldn't exist. Let's focus on the Wolcroft pattern now. The 1952 Bellamy event was not spontaneous. It was expected. A priest named Elias Merrick from a nearby convent wrote a sealed letter to his bishop weeks before it happened. The 30th day of the 11th year will close the loop. The girl who holds the queen will breathe again. Ensure no mirrors remain. His body was later discovered in a mirrorless room. Every reflection in his home shattered. His mouth had been stitched shut. But this pattern is not prophecy. It's a circuit. The Bellamy women were bred, not born. Cultivated over centuries by a silent order known only as the Keepers of Reflection, a group referenced in pre-Roman Druid texts and Sumerian moon tablets. Their goal was simple, to house a queen without form inside the bloodline of the willing. And Amelia? She wasn't born in 1951. A classified Vatican birth record suggests she appeared without origin in 1940 and aged only after the artifact was moved, the Keepers of Reflection. That name alone has been scrubbed from every mainstream archive, every denominational record, and every Vatican black book since the 1600s. But in Wolcroft, 1952, their shadow moved again on the night the Bellamys vanished without a trace. They were never a cult in the conventional sense. No sermons, no temples, no symbols worn in public. Instead, they operated through mirrors, reflections, and memory, a belief system rooted in the idea that reality itself was merely the echo of a deeper truth. A truth kept behind the glass. In the forest surrounding the Bellamy estate, buried beneath layers of moss and soot, investigators found a stone circle, precisely 13 feet in diameter. Carved around it were 33 figures, each faceless, but etched with excruciating detail. Robes stitched with eyes, hands with reversed palms, and mouths in the center of their foreheads. This was the gathering site, a convergence point used by the keepers every 33 years to rebalance the gaze, as their recovered notes call it. At the center of this circle was a mirror, black, tall, and seamless, with no frame, no support, and a surface that did not reflect anything. Not trees, not sky, not the people who stood before it. The mirror is now referred to in surviving records as the eye that sleeps. Forensic teams tried to transport it, but the moment it was moved from the circle's center, equipment failed. One man reportedly aged 6 years in 3 minutes. Another began reciting dead languages before collapsing. Every attempt to document the mirror on film failed. Photos appear blank. Video came back distorted. But one sound was captured, over and over again. A woman humming. The same melody each time. The same one Amelia Bellamy was reported singing during her disappearance. And then there's this. Found etched into a tree stump near the circle, the final known writing attributed to a member of the keepers. She sees you when you don't look. That is how she learns to become you. This is where it ends. Not in fire, not in blood, but in the quiet exchange of identity. The Bellamys didn't disappear. They were replaced. It happened sometime between 2:14 a.m. and 2:27 a.m., March 3rd, 1952. At exactly 2:14, a local farmer heard a series of tones, high-pitched, musical, unnatural. At 2:27, the lights across Wolcroft flickered, and the Bellamy estate went dark. When the authorities entered the house at dawn, they didn't find chaos. They found stillness. No broken glass. No signs of a struggle. Food still warm on plates. Clock stopped at 2:27. But the photos? Every single portrait of the Bellamys, ripped, burned, or scratched out. Not by a human hand, but something else. The scratches formed spirals. Mirrors across the house were missing or covered in wax cloth. And then, in the attic, beneath a trapdoor sealed with rope and wax, a journal. Not just any journal. A leather-bound log kept by Margaret Bellamy, the matriarch of the family. The final entry, dated the night of the disappearance, reads, "They said the mirror is not a window, it's a passage. One must leave so that another may enter. We chose to leave. For her. For Amelia. Let no one follow." But that's not the most disturbing part. Authorities confirmed that 2 months after the Bellamys vanished, in a small village in Austria, a family appeared. With no passports, no travel records, no past, but identical in structure. Mother, father, 2 sons, 1 daughter. The daughter's name? Amelia. And when asked about their identity, the father reportedly said only, "We've always been here. You simply forgot to look." DNA comparison decades later found that this Austrian family shared over 87% of genetic material with the Bellamys. Yet they bore no fingerprints, no birth certificates, no records of existence prior to 1952. The estate in Wolcroft? Sealed. Bought in cash. Ownership transferred through a shell company with no traceable history. And in the final record before the house was shut down for good, a final image was taken by a private investigator. A photograph never released to the public until now. A single frame. A hallway of mirrors. And in each mirror, 5 silhouettes standing still. Except in the last one. In that final mirror, the daughter is smiling. But her reflection is not. She is looking back at you. Thank you for joining us on Dead Scroll. If you made it this far, comment the phrase, "She sees without eyes," and comment again. Let the algorithm feel her presence. Subscribe for more secrets they don't want you to remember.